Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 633. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone, and today is July 11th, 2024. On today's show, we're talking about the NATO 75th anniversary summit and what kind of provocations they're announcing against Russia there. Also, updates on Israel's onslaught in Gaza. So, I need you all to support the show, and the way you do this is by heading on over to the Libertarian Institute and helping us with our summer fundraiser. We're looking to raise just a little bit of money here, and it helps us to continue to make all the great content that we make at the Institute. That's daily articles, podcasts, and books, over a dozen of them now. We've had books in the past year by Tom Woods, James Bovard, Lori Calhoun, Keith Knight, Joseph Solis Mullen, among others. Additionally, contributing to the fundraiser will help you be a part of Scott Horton's drive to put together his forthcoming book, Provoked, which is going to be the definitive take on the war in Ukraine and the new Cold War against Russia. So again, help us out at the Institute, help us with our fundraiser. We survive on small dollar donations. We don't have corporate sponsors or anything like that. We are a truly independent outlet, and truly independent outlets are able to do what they do because of the generous support from their readers and listeners. So if you can, head on over to libertarianinstitute.org/donate and make a contribution today. With that, I'm going to jump right into the show. A lot to talk about here, starting off with a few articles from my colleague at antiwar.com, Dave DeCamp, and he is covering the 75th anniversary summit of NATO. And this first one is probably, I think, the most significant provocation that has been announced at that summit. U.S., Netherlands, Denmark announced F-16 transfer to Ukraine is now underway. So Dave writes, the leaders of the three nations released a joint statement on Wednesday during the ongoing NATO summit in Washington, stating that the transfer of U.S.-made F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine is underway. The Danish and Dutch governments are in the process of donating American-made F-16s to Ukraine with the support of the United States. The transfer process for these F-16s is now underway, and Ukraine will be flying operational F-16s this summer, the statement said. The three leaders said Belgium and Norway have also pledged to send jets. According to previous reports, 4 European nations have pledged to send Ukraine about 60 F-16s, but the training process has been slow, and only a few pilots are expected to be ready this summer. Additionally, of those 60 F-16s, these are not the F-16s you think of, where if you went and you saw them, they're complete planes that could have a pilot hop in them, fuel up, and go fly. That's not what we're talking about here. Some of these planes are actually only airframes. Others are retired from the Danish or the Dutch air forces. They've replaced them with new, more modern warplanes. And so, they need some modernization, upgrades, and things like that before they're ready to fly. Now, some of them are probably combat ready, just a small portion of them. I guess fortunately for these countries, there's not a surplus of Ukrainian pilots. This is, I believe, what Christopher Cavoli said. He is the U.S. Commander in charge of CENTCOM. That the real struggle is that Ukraine has battlefield needs. And so logistically, if you only have a handful of pilots and you have ongoing military operations in Ukraine that requires those pilots to operate aircraft, then you can't send those pilots to train on the F-16 in the US and Germany or wherever. And so that has been one of the real strains on the number of pilots that have been trained. I'm not sure how many pilots are trained. It could be as small as a half dozen or so. I guess it could be as many as about 20, but my guess is it's not very many. So ahead of the long-awaited F-16 transfer, Russia has stepped up attacks on Ukrainian airfields, destroying several Soviet-made aircraft. Ukrainian officials have said to protect their F-16s, they might store some abroad, which could make NATO bases housing them potential targets for the Russian military. And, we really have to ask here, and this is an incredibly important question, what does it actually mean that these NATO countries are going to store an F-16? Does it just mean that they have some Ukrainian airframes of NATO F-16s that they're going to leave in Germany, Poland, Romania, something like that. And maybe they'll work on them, or maybe they'll cannibalize the parts and send them over to Ukraine. In which case, I don't think Russia would probably take major action against those air bases. Now, let's say what it means to store those planes at these air bases essentially means to house them at those air bases where they are taking off from these air bases. Maybe they first fly over Ukrainian territory, but then they're conducting struts either on the front line or in Ukraine or even in Russia, and then maybe returning directly to, maybe landing at a Ukrainian airfield and then taking off and then returning to um, a NATO airbase. So you could see that they could get, and we have seen, take for example the situation where the Americans said we would have no boots on the ground in Gaza, and we literally have American soldiers and American vehicles in a foot deep of water, and they're saying that that doesn't count because they're still in the Mediterranean Sea, because they're standing on the beach in a small amount of water. At low tide they're going to be on Gazan territory, but since it's high tide, what they're doing is fine, according to the thinking of the Pentagon. And so if that really is the thinking of the Pentagon, how long would an F-16 have to be in Ukraine before they claim, okay, it's taking off from this Ukrainian base? Now, for Russia, I think that's going to be an extended period of time. Remember, F-16s are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. And so from the Russian perspective, these present a strategic threat. Now, my guess is that none of these F-16s are going to carry NATO nuclear warheads. However, just imagine for a second here that you are the Russians. The U.S. has nuclear weapons stored in the Netherlands, Germany, Italy, Turkey, and one other country. And if we're talking about these F-16s being stored in, say, Germany, right, then you're having the F-16s stored in the same country that the planes are going to be taken off from. I mean, this is a major provocation towards Russia, a major problem. And so hopefully, I mean, this doesn't lead to some kind of dread confrontation where Russia is bombing NATO countries and NATO bases. I think the hope here really has to be that Russia disables the Ukrainian airfields and essentially prevents this from ever getting off the ground. They transferred 3 or 6 or 12 F-16s to Ukraine, and Russia is able to destroy them pretty quickly. Well, then, we've all averted World War III that way. They transferred these F-16s and they're in bases in Romania. They're taking off. They're doing a quick stop in Ukraine before bombing Russian territory. Well, then I think we do run a real risk of this being something that could escalate us into a major conflict. Another major provocation here, U.S. announces it will deploy previously banned nuclear-capable missiles to Germany. So again, this is from Dave DeCamp. The U.S. announced on Wednesday that it will deploy missiles to Germany that would have been banned under the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, which the U.S. withdrew from in 2019. The INF prohibited land-based systems with a range of between 310 and 3,400 miles. The planned deployment to Germany includes land-based version of the nuclear-capable Tomahawk missile, which has a range of about 1,000 miles and are primarily used by U.S. Navy ships and submarines. This is a statement from the U.S. and Germany, and of course it was released as U.S. and German leaders are meeting during the NATO summit. So it says the United States will begin episodic deployments of long-range fires capabilities of its multi-domain task force in Germany in 2026 as planning for enduring stationing of these capabilities in the future. When fully deployed, these conventional long-range fire units will include SM-6, Tomahawk, and Advanced hypersonic weapons, which have significantly longer ranges than the current land-based fires in Europe. So based on the statement, the U.S. is likely planning to deploy the Typhoon launcher, a covert system concealed in a 40-foot shipping container that can fire Tomahawks and SM-6 missiles. The SM-6 can hit targets 290 miles away, which isn't in violation of the INF treaty when it did exist. The U.S. previously deployed Typhoon launchers for military exercises in the Philippines and Denmark. The announcement of regular deployment of the systems to Germany comes after Russian President Vladimir Vladimir Putin, said Moscow would follow the U.S. in developing weapons previously banned by the INF. When the U.S. withdrew from the INF treaty, it claimed Russia was violating the agreement by developing ground-launched M729 cruise missiles. Russian officials denied the missile was a violation, saying it had a maximum range of 298 miles. Russia also accused the U.S. of potentially violating the INF treaty by establishing Aegis Ashore missile systems in Romania and Poland. The systems use Mk-41 vertical launchers, which can fit Tomahawk missiles, and it's very important to note that the INF treaty explicitly not only banned the missiles, that can, the land-based missiles that have a range of between 310 and 3,400 miles, but also the launchers for that missiles. And so the Mk-41s and these Typhoons would certainly be both in violation of the INF treaty, which, remember, very important, that Donald Trump withdrew from. For all the talk we get about how Donald Trump just wants to have giveaways to Russia and only to help Russia, he is the man who has maybe done more than anyone but Joe Biden to significantly escalate the tensions with Ukraine by withdrawing from the INF treaty. We're starting to see this arms race actually play out in Europe, where Russia and now the U.S. are both planning to deploy these missiles that haven't been deployed to Europe since the Cold War because of the INF treaty. And, we're having a major step backward and, disarmament, which is extremely unfortunate. All right, next up here, NATO communique repeats vague promise on Ukraine membership, accuses China of being enabler of war. So NATO's communique released on Wednesday during the summit in Washington repeated a vague promise made to Ukraine last year regarding its future membership and accused China of fueling the Russia-Ukraine war. The communique describes Ukraine's potential future NATO membership as irreversible, but does not offer any concrete steps towards Kiev actually joining the alliance. The communique reads, "We welcome concrete progress Ukraine has made since the Vilnius summit," which is the last year NATO summit, "on its required democratic, economic, and security reforms. As Ukraine continues this vital work, we will continue to support it on its irreversible path to full Euro-Atlantic recognition, including NATO membership." The communique continues to say NATO will invite Ukraine to join when all allies agree conditions are met. The same ambiguous language was used in last year's communique at the summit in Vilnius that had Ukrainian President Zelensky fuming. The alliance did make new commitments to Ukraine related to the proxy war against Russia, including a pledge to provide $43 billion in military aid for 2025, new air defense systems, and the stationing of a NATO official in Kiev. Regarding Beijing, the communique took aim at China's trade relationship with Russia. The alliance said the People's Republic of China has become a decisive enabler of Russia's war against Ukraine through its so-called no-limit partnership and its large-scale support for the Russian defense industrial base. In recent months, the U.S. and NATO have been accusing China of fueling the war in Ukraine, despite the fact that Beijing hasn't sent any military aid, while the Western alliance has been pouring weapons into the conflict zone and discouraging peace talks. In the communique, the alliance demands that China stop exporting dual-use items to Russia. We call on China to cease all material and political support to Russia's war effort. This includes transfer of dual-use materials such as weapons components, equipment, and raw materials that serve as inputs for Russia's defense sector. China cannot enable the largest war in Europe in recent history without it negatively impacting its interests and reputation, which, just it is really funny given what NATO has done to fuel and encourage this war. So NATO started targeting China in its documents in 2020, and in 2022, it formally declared the North Atlantic Military Alliance was facing a security challenge from Beijing. And so in this communique, it says China continues to pose a systematic challenge to the Euro-Atlantic security. China continues to strongly condemn NATO's focus on the Asia-Pacific region as a whole. This is from the Chinese Foreign Ministry. China's position on NATO is consistent. We firmly oppose NATO acting beyond its characterization as a regional defensive alliance, inserting itself into the Asia Pacific to incite confrontation and rivalry and disrupt the prosperity and stability in the region. So I don't have much else to mention on the summit. There's, a lot going on in Washington, D.C. The fake libertarian institution, the Cato Institute, is even hosting a summit on the need to continue the NATO alliance. And so, those in the Beltway, I guess, are really enjoying all the festivities going on while the rest of the nation just sits in horror as we flush more of our money away on a pointless war that's only going to get more Ukrainians killed. All right, next up here, Dems to keep unconditional military aid to Israel in party platform. I wrote this one for the Institute on July 10th. A senior Biden administration official explained that the Democratic Party has no plans to alter its policy of unconditional arms support for Israel. President Biden has provided Israel with billions of dollars in weapons since October 7th, including over 10,000 heavy bombs. After an internal DNC debate over the party's plank on arms shipments to Israel, an official explained that President Biden has no plans to change the policy that allows weapons to flow to Tel Aviv with no conditions on how they are used. The official said the platform will reflect the views of the President of the United States, and cutting aid to Israel is not the president's policy. Over the past 9 months, the White House has sent Israel over $6.5 billion in arms, including tens of thousands of bombs. 14,000 of those munitions have been massive one-ton bombs. American-made bombs had contributed to the enormous death toll that has now surpassed 38,000. While American weapons have been documented to have been used in Israeli attacks on civilian targets in Gaza, the White House has maintained that Tel Aviv has not violated U.S. laws. President Biden has no plans to curtail arms shipments except for one shipment of heavy bombs. A growing number of Democratic voters have broken with the president over this unfettered support for the Israeli onslaught in Gaza. An April poll found that about 40% of Democrats believe Biden has given Israel too much support. Biden is a self-proclaimed Zionist and has been a vocal supporter of Israel for decades. Over his career, the president has frequently claimed that if Israel is so vital to American security that if it did not exist, the U.S. would have to create Israel. However, the argument that Israel contributes to American security is rebuked by the head of the State Department's intelligence agency, Brett Holmgren. The Assistant Secretary of State explained earlier this week that the Israeli war on Gaza is driving recruitment into jihadist organizations and inspiring lone wolf terrorists. So, real threat to the actual security of actual Americans. All right, so picking up on a couple of threads from my article, let's talk a little bit more about U.S. bombs being used to kill civilians. This one here from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israel used U.S.-provided bomb on schools sheltering civilians. Israel used a U.S.-provided bomb in a strike on a school in a town in the east of southern Gaza City. The bomb was used in Khan Yunis. That's a location that was sheltering civilians. So the airstrike hit tents outside of the school in the town of Al-Basan on Tuesday. Officials at the nearby Nasser hospital said 31 Palestinians were killed in the Israeli attack, including 8 children. Footage from Al Jazeera shows children playing soccer in the schoolyard as the strike hits the school entrance. Weapons experts told CNN that the video of the aftermath showed remnants of a U.S.-made GBU-39 small diameter bomb, which is a 250-pound munition. And I'm not sure if anybody saw the video. It's been circulating social media. I don't want to play it here. I was tempted to, but my reservation is, of course, that if this gets me a YouTube strike for showing violence or something of that nature, which is why I haven't gone into very much video. Also, I do feel that if you want to witness it, like, you could go find it yourself. But I don't want to just throw it up there for somebody to see. It's a lot of this stuff is extremely traumatic and hard to watch. But this particular video just shows, a whole host of people, right? It almost looks like what you would see at an American high school, right? Where you have just like a lot of people on the sides, like younger kids, parents, stuff like that, watching what appeared to be older teens playing a game of soccer. Everybody seems enthused. And I'm sure for the Palestinian people who have suffered so much over the past 9 months, that moments like this are really important to keeping their sanity and community, and keeping society from not falling apart even more than it already is. I mean, this is at least a little bit of a normal experience that a Palestinian kid, not only the players, but the kids watching, get to experience. For the parents of the players, this is a normal experience that they get. So, I'm sure these kinds of things are incredibly important. You see them playing soccer, and suddenly the camera starts shaking, a bomb has clearly struck, there's dust pouring up, and so it's just horrible that the U.S. would continue to support Israel as it just ruthlessly massacres civilians. And as much as it would be easy to say, look, in the fog of war, things happen. Maybe there was some Hamas member there. Maybe there was some Hamas guy outside. Who knows? Maybe Hamas was even trying to take advantage of this soccer game to set up a little exchange or something like that, right? We have no idea. And who knows what Israel will say. But it seems more likely that what has happened here, given everything we have seen over the past 9 months, is Israel saw these Palestinian people getting together and have a little bit of reprieve from the intense trauma that they've been subjected to over the past 9 months. And this basically is like a message like, hey, there will be no happiness for Palestinians in Gaza. Like, even if you enjoy something, we will continue to rain bombs down on you. So Dave wraps up this article. GBU 39 bombs have been used in other massacres in Gaza, including a June strike on a UN school, a May attack on a temp camp in Rafah, and likely more. The vast majority of the bombs Israel uses in Gaza are provided by the U.S., since Washington is Tel Aviv's main supplier of weapons. A recent report published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, that is SPIRI, in March found that Israel gets 99% of its arms from the U.S. and Germany. From 2019 to 2023, the report said the U.S. accounted for 69% of Israeli weapons, while Germany 30%. All right, next up here, U.S. resumes shipments of 500-pound bombs to Israel. And so there was a lot of confusion over the past couple months, since I believe April, when the Biden administration announced it was suspending an arms shipment to Israel over the continued use of large bombs by Israel on civilian areas. And initially, this was reported as a shipment of 2,000 and 500-pound bombs. And then the White House started talking about it as if it was just the shipment of 2,000-pound bombs. Now, I don't think either of these really mattered. If you look at the amount of weapons that the U.S. has shipped Israel since October 7th, what Israel already had in its stockpiles, what the Israeli and American officials said was that Israel is well enough equipped to utterly reduce Gaza to rubble without this additional shipment of 2,000 pound and potentially 500-pound bombs. And so really, this is all kind of an irrelevant and a side issue, but at the same time, it is incredibly important because it's one of the little things that shows any little separation between the White House and Tel Aviv. So Dave writes here, the Biden administration is sending a shipment of 500-pound bombs to Israel that it initially delayed as a public relations stunt to make it appear the U.S. was doing something to rein in Israel's killing of civilians. The U.S. is still withholding a shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, but it sent 14,000 of them to Israel since October 7th, giving the Israeli military plenty to drop on the densely populated areas of Gaza. The U.S. announced in May it was withholding the bomb shipments and claimed it was doing so to pressure Israel not to launch a major assault on Rafah without taking into account the 1.4 million civilians that were sheltering there. Israel ended up going ahead with the invasion and captured the Rafah border crossing, cutting off a vital channel for aid and strengthening the starvation blockade. The assault on Rafah left the city in rubble, and the majority of civilians were forced to flee overcrowded, unsanitary camps, which have been targeted by the Israeli military. Throughout the assault, the U.S. claimed it was more limited operations than what Israel initially planned. Despite Israel committing massacres in the city, the U.S. provided weapons, and the U.S. continued to support the attacks. The U.S. is now sending 500-pound bombs at a time when Israel has escalated operations across Gaza, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is actively working to sabotage the chances for a ceasefire. All right, and the last article I have up here today: Israel orders evacuation of Gaza City. On Wednesday, the Israeli military told residents of Gaza City in the northern Gaza Strip to evacuate and head south, signaling an assault on the city will escalate soon. The military dropped leaflets and said all those in Gaza City should be headed to Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, but nowhere in the strip is safe from Israeli bombs, as so-called safe zones have been frequently hit. The UN noted that Deir al-Balah is already overcrowded, and the area was also targeted by Israeli strikes on Wednesday. Israeli bombed 4 homes in Deir al-Balah at the nearby Nusra refugee camp, killing 20 Palestinians, including 6 children and 3 women. The AP reports that one of its reporters counted bodies at the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital, and that the houses in Deir al-Balah were in the so-called humanitarian safe zone, where Israel told Palestinians in Gaza City to flee. Israel has also ordered the evacuation of Gaza City several times throughout the past 9 months of its genocidal war. The city lies to the north in the Nazarene Corridor, a 38 square kilometer zone that separates the north from the rest of the strip. The Israeli military has demolished most buildings in the corridor and uses its buildings as bases and paving roads. So, according to the AP, there was no mass exit from Gaza City after the evacuation order, since Palestinians understand there is no place safe in the south. Palestinians also know that if they leave their homes, they likely won't be able to return. It's estimated that 300,000 Palestinians remain in North Gaza, the majority being in Gaza City. Haaretz reported this week that, including the Nazarene Corridor, a buffer zone along the Gaza-Israel border, the Philadelphia Corridor on the Egypt-Gaza border, and the Israeli military controls about 26% or a quarter of all of Gaza's territory. Many of the soldiers and politicians, including members of Netanyahu's government, want to reestablish Jewish settlements in these areas. Clearing Palestinians out of the north would allow Israel to conquer more territory for potential settlements. And while that could certainly be the goal here, it seems to me that really what Israel is doing is just they're chasing the Palestinians from place to place, because if the Palestinians have a chance to return to anywhere, they're going to start to reestablish. They're going to start to build lives. They're going to start to reopen bakeries. They'll distribute food. They'll find places for the orphaned children. They'll start to rebuild their communities. And this is what Israel does not want. That's why they chased everybody from north to south, and they kept attacking the cities, right? All the way down to Rafah. And now that they got to Rafah and destroyed Rafah, it seems they're doing it again, right? They went in, they attacked Jabalia in the north again. They already ordered the evacuation of Khan Yunis in the south again. Now they're going after Gaza City. It really seems that the goal here is to keep the Palestinians on the move. Because if you're on the move, you can't carry a lot of food. You can't carry a lot of shelter. It's just you, your children, the clothes on your back, and maybe enough food to get you through the next 24 or 48 hours. And so this is keeping the Palestinian people on the verge of death, on the verge of famine. And I really think that is what Netanyahu's intention is here. All right, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. And I know some of you who listen to the show have already contributed to our fundraiser at the Libertarian Institute. Let me just ask again, if you haven't done that, to head on over to the Institute and to make a contribution. It really does help us out. It allows us to continue doing this. And anyways, yep. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back with one more show tomorrow. Co-host of the show, Connor Freeman, returns.